Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be joined by Congressman Jake Ellzey to round out today's event. Congressman Ellzey, in his first full term in the House, having won a special election in 2021 from Texas' 6th District, long day.
That's why I never say it that way.
So, Mr. Ellzey was tapped by House Republicans to join the Appropriations Committee at the start of the 118th Congress. And just a couple months ago, the chairwoman at the time, Kate Granger, from your Dallas-Fort Worth area, tapped you to be a Defense Appropriations Subcommittee member. But a long career in the national security realm, retired Navy fighter pilot and Naval Academy grad, deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq, and was, as was mentioned, air boss of the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan, and continued flying as a commercial pilot after retiring. But if you're like me and you watch way too much C-SPAN, I think some of us know you from presiding over the House quite a bit, which we were talking backstage, and the congressman said is kind of like being an air boss on an aircraft carrier. So there's a lot going on this week. We've had a lot of great discussions leading up to this. So I think we can dive right in. As you said, you represent a defense-adjacent area in Texas, and are now, I think, in your third month on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. You've taken part in that bill. You've been through the process. You've been in the classified briefings, et cetera. Particularly when it comes to the supply chain, things like that. What keeps you up at night?
Supply chain, China, and a realm that looks very much like 1938, with four nations throughout the world who are aligning themselves much like the Axis did in 1938. Three of whom are currently at war. One is waiting to see when they can swoop in. That's how I see the world. So you got Iran, who's currently at war with their three proxy armies, the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. And then you have Russia, China, and North Korea. We're technically still at war with North Korea. That is not an armistice. That is a ceasefire. And then you have the Russians, who are actively at war going after Ukraine. And I would like to say also that this isn't just a war. I believe that the war in Ukraine is a genocide, and I believe it is imperial. And I think we're talking about the empire of China and the empire of Russia, because they're doing total war. They're not just going after land and people. They're going after the natural resources throughout the Belt and Road for China. And if you want to go about Ukraine, and if you want to take the moral compass out of the deal, which I can't, what they're doing in Ukraine is exactly what Stalin did in 1931 with the Holodomor, and he's trying to destroy a people, is going after the lithium and the gas fields in Ukraine. Can you imagine if China and Russia have all the natural resources in Europe, gas, lithium, cobalt in China that are being mined by child slaves? This is imperial. They are empires, and they want world domination. So three of those are currently at war, and China's waiting to see how we respond to a potential Hezbollah strike. Are we going to help our friends, the Israelis? Are we going to continue to help our friends, the Ukrainians? Are we going to help our democratic allies throughout the world? That's what they're waiting to see. And they know what we're $35 trillion in debt. They know that we're limited by the FRA on the amount of money that we can spend. They know what our limitations are. They study our leadership and seeing how they respond to world crises. This is a dangerous, dangerous time. And so when you talk about stable funding, as I heard the Secretary say just a minute ago, that keeps me up at night too, because we have great plans. Chairman Cole, and I think all of us are on board for getting these bills passed, but you're in a presidential election year, and politics does play a role. So we need these bills to pass, because the number one industry that pays a price and the number one service that pays the price is our military and our defense industry, because without a stable funding mechanism, they can't plan, they can't build, they can't hire.
Well, let me pick up on that point of the fiscal limits. Obviously, there's a cap on defense spending.
Yep.
Is that going to go anywhere? I suppose we'll see how that shakes out. But there's some members, I think, of your own party who would say, okay, we got all these things going on. We have Israel, Hamas, we have Ukraine, we have also Taiwan, and some would say we need to dial back Ukraine because the real conflict is China-Taiwan. How would you respond to something like that? You know, there's not enough to go around, not enough missiles, not enough munitions, not enough artillery shells.
I would say that you can't isolate each of these actors because they're all working together. Iranian drones are being used in Ukraine. North Korea is working with Russia, and on and on and on. They're all coordinated. Hezbollah is funded by and under the direction of, and so are the Houthis, by the Iranians. So you can't isolate one or the other. They're joined. We couldn't do that anymore in World War II, and the way they're going after them piece by piece by piece means only one thing, that it's widespread. So if you're saying, well, we're limited by the amount, do you think our enemies know that? You rise to meet the challenge. 10 years ago, if China wasn't so ascendant and showing that their aim is not just Taiwan, which would be catastrophic to our modern life, right? We all agree with that. It's the South China Sea, which is in between Taiwan and China. And a third of the world's commerce goes through that. The Houthis have already shut down the Red Sea. And so when people say our prices have gone up, well, that's because the Red Sea is now shut down because of the Houthis. And we haven't gone after them? I don't understand that. As a military guy, I don't think you should be shot at and not respond. But that's what we've done. So they're working in concert. If you think these guys aren't talking to each other, they are. So it's not isolated and you can't take them one at a time. So we have to rise to the challenge. 10 years ago, I'm a fiscal hawk. But if we don't have a nation that we can defend, then you can't work on that $35 trillion. They're paying attention. If I were the Chinese, hey, they have $35 trillion in debt, they're gonna have some folks who aren't willing to pay the price to defend their nation or their allies. Let's go now. That makes sense to me.
So there's at the same time, I think from appropriators been some skepticism, perhaps more skepticism than the authorizers of efforts to rapidly ramp up things like missile production. I think we saw and this predates your time on HAC-D obviously, but last year's bill that came out of the House had a lot of cuts to the Pentagon's plan for multi-year procurement of missiles, and there was a lot of skepticism that industry can, even with the money, can ramp up this quickly, can produce that quickly.
Well, there's the supply chain issue right there. And since COVID, 6 months into COVID, 30% of the small firms in the country had supply chain issues. A year later, it was 35%. 48 major programs have supply chain issues, and the after effect of of COVID is that didn't just go away. It still exists. And as I said, and here's something that's extremely important. If you're putting limitations on your own industry to produce power and rare earth minerals in your own country, and the Chinese and the Russians are going throughout the world with Belt and Road, they're all the way up into Central America. What happened to the Monroe Doctrine? Apparently it went away. Not for me, but it's no longer existent. They have spread all the way throughout the rest of the world, soaking up everything they can to outbuild us 10 to 1 on ships. And so they're taking all that stuff up, and we are artificially limiting, not through Congress, but through the regulatory agencies, the EPA and others. You're going to spend $1.7 trillion on an infrastructure bill. But in my district, we have cement plants. So if you can't build your own rebar because you're going to put restrictions on that amp up, and you can't make cement because you're going to change the emission standards, then you're spending money on nothing. And we're artificially doing that on our own. We can mine cobalt in the United States and process it, but we won't because of the EPA. The Chinese have no rules like that. And something else I'd like to address, when you're talking about, let's say, submarines, right? We need more submarines. We got AUKUS and we've got our own needs. We can't build 2 a year, and we have those requirements. Well, you can't just spend money and get people that don't exist. And here's something that I'd like you to think about. If you're killing 200 people a day with a chemical, is that a weapon of mass destruction in chemical warfare? Rhetorical. But if all the compounds from fentanyl come from China, in which everything is a military operation, everything that China does is a military operation for world domination. Can we agree on that? Maybe there might be some dispute to that. That's what I believe. And you're sending over the compounds to the cartels to kill 200 Americans age 18 to 49 every day. Those are your welders for the submarine boat yards. Those are your cops. Those are your soldier, sailor, airman, and Marines, those are your laborers. And we're losing wartime numbers every year. We lost 305 Americans every day in World War II, fighting tyranny overseas. We're losing 300 Americans every day to drug overdose and fentanyl poisoning. I make the distinction because most people who are taking fentanyl aren't trying to overdose. One pill can kill. I was at the DEA the other day, and I'm grateful for the DEA. I'm a big fan of the DEA. Fully fund the DEA, increase the funding for the DEA. They're doing God's work here, trying to protect Americans. So if the Chinese don't need to fight us on the battlefield in the high seas, because they can't do it yet, we're still outnumbering them, and we're still better. But if you can kill them in the backyards and in the bedrooms with fentanyl, you've still won your mission. So I think that's something extremely important. If you don't have the people to do the job, you can't build those boats.
Well, we could keep talking about this and
we have
so many
already?
other issues, but unfortunately that's all the time we have, and we're the last thing standing between people and the reception. So I'd like to
people and booze don't get in the way.
I'd like to thank Congressman Ellzey for taking time out of a very busy week for this conversation.
Connor, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank all of our guests for being here and sharing their thoughts and some very engaging discussions. I'd commend all of you to please attend the reception afterward, and please be sure to also read the great reporting of my colleagues at Politico and Politico Pro. And thank you again, and have a great evening.
And beat Army.